Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks so much for joining this conversation. The pace of renewable energy investments has only gained momentum over the past decade. According to the International Energy Agency's World Energy Investment 2023 report, $2.8 trillion will be invested this year in energy, including fossil fuels. But 61% of that money is actually going to clean energy now. Our guest today is Ben Wolkon. He is a partner at MUUS Climate Ventures, an investment company with a portfolio of renewable energy and clean tech companies. The renewable energy market has clearly crossed the chasm and entered the scale-up phase. Now, the question is, how can we go even faster? Because the United States and the world is still not on track to cut emissions by 50% before 2030. Let's return a moment to the International Energy Agency's analysis, which reported that for every $1 spent on fossil fuels, $1.7 is now being spent on clean energy. 5 years ago, that ratio was only 1 to 1. So we're seeing real progress, and most of that investment is flowing into new companies. But oil companies are not using their recent record profits to invest in renewables. Instead, they're developing more wells and paying dividends, ignoring the opportunity to invest in low carbon and renewable energy for the most part. Massive oil and gas profits during the pandemic have unfortunately attracted many investors back to fossil fuel energy. That's not a good long-term strategy, and it appears oil companies will not be positioned to compete with renewables as solar and wind generation prices continue to fall well below the cost of the fossil fuel-generated electricity that we are all used to. These are just a few of the questions I have for Ben, so let's dive into this important conversation. You can learn more about MUUS Climate Partners at MUUSclimate.com. That's MUUS Climate.com. MUUS Climate is all one word, no space, no dash. Hey, welcome to the show, Ben. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Mitch. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's been a busy week here, and I know you have a lot on your plate. I want to start off by asking you, now that we've reached the scale-up stage in the renewables transition, what are the main challenges facing the renewable energy industry today?
You know, it's a great question, and the industry's evolved so much just in the last 10 years. I think Michael and I first started working together about 8 years ago at what was the predecessor to what's now MUUS Climate Partners, at a time when there was a lot of challenges around the climate tech investing ecosystem and renewable energy. Mm-hmm. But we thought that would change because at that time we saw a ton of exciting technology being commercialized. Conventional renewables and batteries were becoming cost competitive, and there were really great software plays adjacent to those hardware plays that could allow them to scale more easily and also become very valuable companies in and of themselves. And that cost competitiveness means you wouldn't have to cross your fingers and hope for better policy, although now we do have IRA as of a little over a year ago, and that's really helping to create a more robust renewable energy and climate tech ecosystem. And there's a lot more capital coming into the space and a lot more entrepreneurial power as well. So that's really great, and we saw that coming on the horizon and began investing together under what we called the convergence thesis, which was the idea that great bleeding edge technologies like AI and advances in materials science would overlap with well-known climate solutions like renewables and electric vehicles. And the dovetailing of those two would create some of the best investment opportunities of our lifetime while playing an outsized role in addressing the greatest problem of our lifetime. Now, despite that, as you said, there are still challenges, just like there would always be with any industry.
Sure.
One is that a lot of decarbonization runs through electrification, and power utilities, are not moving fast enough when it comes to deploying clean energy, shutting down dirty energy, and adopting new technologies that can speed up that transition. Another is that rising interest rates make deployment a challenge generally and change the economics of certain clean energy projects. Another is that the fossil fuel industry, for the most part, is still doing everything in its power to slow the energy transition. And of course, they'll complain about clean energy subsidies, but we often don't talk about how disgustingly subsidized the fossil fuel industry is, and that they get away with not having to pay for the pollution that's destroying the planet. And we know at this point that when an oil giant puts out a plan to be net zero, we probably shouldn't believe it. it's more of a PR move, and they'll reverse course, as we saw in the recent year with Shell, Exxon, BP, and I think some others. So fossil fuel incumbents are still a big problem. And then finally, there's the simple fact that scaling any new technology is hard and it takes time, but we don't have a lot of time to do this transition. We have 75 months until 2030, 75 months until 2030. And that's when we have to cut emissions in half, according to the world scientists. That's not a lot of time to scale renewable technologies and to shut down fossil fuels as much as we possibly can.
So, Ben, there's a lot to unpack in what you just said. Let's talk about your convergence thesis and how, having been through the digital transition already, where it took a while for the various facets of the technology to come together to produce really revolutionary changes in society and within business. In the sustainability transition right now, companies have been leading the way, a lot like in the digital transition. How is software going to come together with this new infrastructure to change the experience that we have at home?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So first of all, there's a completely legitimate school of thought, which I ascribe to, which says, for the most part, yes, innovation is great, but we need to deploy. We need to get renewables, we have renewable energy that has been invented. The cost has come down to be competitive. We have batteries. We just need to deploy renewables, electric vehicles, electric home heating systems, energy efficiency, etc. We just need to get that out. We don't need to worry about something that needs a 10-year R&D time horizon, and we don't need to wait 20 years for nuclear fusion to save us. We don't need, you can go on with your list. That's a completely legitimate school of thought. But what we believe within the convergence thesis is that there are certain picks and shovels plays that can really accelerate that deployment and improve the use case of clean technology. So just to give an example, a company that we've backed called Bright is using advanced analytics to figure out the optimal siting and design of large-scale renewable energy projects so that they can be put together in a way that actually maximally displaces fossil fuels. You might have seen a headline recently that they're doing a project in Kentucky. I believe it'll be the largest solar project in the state. It will be built on the site of one of the largest coal mines in the country, and it's being done in partnership with Rivian, which is doing a large virtual power purchase agreement as part of it. But there's been analysis done by the nonprofit Watt Time that has shown that this project has twice the carbon impact that a renewable project in other parts of the country would, because it's maximally displacing fossil fuels. It's being sited in an area and designed in such a way that it would have an outsized impact. So that would be one use case. Another is that a company we back called Harvest Thermal is combining efficient electric home heating systems with smart analytics that can actually draw power from the grid when renewables are online and store it in a hot water tank for later use when the home needs it. So you're matching supply and demand. As you know, you only get solar power when the sun shines, but if you can match that supply of power with the drawing of power and storing it for later, then all of a sudden you've solved intermittency. And the way that we think about the convergence thesis is kind of splitting it into three phases. First is we need a large-scale build out of the power grid and large-scale electrification. And if you do the math, probably more than half of your decarbonization picture comes through electrification and the decarbonization of electric power. I call that the overlap of data and physics, physics being the movement of electrons and data being the great analytical plays that can accelerate that electrification. So that's your smart home heating, your vehicle to grid services, your grid intelligence, your advanced analytics for renewable project siting and scoping, as I just talked about with Bright. That's your overlap of data and physics. Then your second part of that, which is a little further out, is to recognize that electrification won't solve all dirty energy and that we don't have 100% of that puzzle solved yet. And the way that we're going to solve the rest of that puzzle is through the overlap of data and chemistry. That's new advancements in battery storage, that's your clean fuels, that's your renewable reactors, that's your advances in electrolysis that will improve the use case for clean energy and go places where clean power can't quite go today. So you got your data and physics, Then you've got your data and chemistry. And that basically tackles your energy related portion of the climate problem, which energy accounts for about 80% of your emissions in the US, 70% globally. And then your third piece, a little further out than that, is the overlap of data and biology. And that's where you get breakthroughs in biotech that might help solve agricultural methane from cows, waste, chemicals, those things that represent that last 20% of emissions in the US and 30% globally. So that's how we kind of segment it out. And those three things come in sort of sequential time horizons, right? Your large scale electrification, your home heating, your electric cars and related services around those are being deployed today. Your second, you're dealing with a little bit of a longer time horizon. And your third, you might be even a little further out. But all three are investable in their own ways today. And we're looking at all three.
So you're describing, again, analogous to the digital transition, we're migrating from a centralized approach to data, in this case, energy, to a distributed one. And then the management of that distributed environment is one of the major undertakings we're engaged in right now. And finally, the last part of that, the biological, is essentially once the new infrastructure has propagated, you can plug in the biological role and really take us the last mile toward decarbonization. But
right, once we electrify everything, we still can't electrify a cow that belches methane. So we're going to have to figure out a way to solve that.
Well, so what are you looking for when you consider an investment today? Is it the team and the ability to scale quickly? Is it innovation, or do you feel like we already have all the innovation we need and it's more a matter of managing it?
I think we can never get enough innovation, although we are cautious of the time horizon to deployment. If there's one quality that we could take to a desert island, it's the team. And any venture investor in any industry will give you the same anecdote, which is that a great team can take a mediocre idea and turn it into something great, and a bad team can take a great idea and run it into the ground. So the first thing that we care about is whether the right pieces are in place with the team in order to really build something fantastic. And then after that, we have a team of 7 people, all of whom have committed years and years of their lives to studying this space and understanding it. And we take a global top-down approach to where we think the needle's really going to be moved. And we come up with some ideas and seek out founders who are solving some of these big problems. But we never cease to be surprised by stuff that just comes into our inbox that we hadn't necessarily thought about yet. That gets us really excited and we jump on it.
Well, let me ask about one of the companies in your portfolio, Nth Cycle. Megan O'Connor, the CEO, has been on our show, and they recycle critical minerals. What role do you see recycling playing in migrating from the fossil fuel-driven environment to a renewable and sustainable environment? How does for EV batteries and grid storage? Why was that a good investment for you?
I think if you talk to any leading academic or researcher that studies environmental systems and climate systems, they would say that even if we solve the emissions problem and the way that we're solving the emissions problem, we have another ecological crisis on our hands a few decades from now, which is what happens with all of that battery waste and all of the extraction that we're doing. And Nth Cycle is a real multi-solving type of company which can deal with that waste, but also have a great economic use case, which is that they're putting the battery waste, through a process that eliminates largely your hydrometallurgy and pyrometallurgy, meaning you're heating it up to hot temperatures, and your chemical baths. They're getting rid of a lot of that, having a much more sustainable process, and through that, extracting more metal at a higher purity so you can actually sell it for a higher dollar amount. So there's a great environmental use case, a great economic use case, and they're in the right place at the right time. I think earlier this year, it was announced that they had a first of its kind production facility set up here in the US. So there's a great domestic supply chain story around them too. And we think it's a fantastic team building a really exciting product.
Do you imagine that we'll reach a point where it won't be necessary to extract the critical minerals that that nth cycle is recycling, and that we could literally live on what we have out of the ground already?
That's beyond my pay grade. I'm not really sure. All I know is that for everything that is discarded, we would be much better off reintroducing it into the system than throwing it out. And nth cycle is building a solution that can help with that.
I completely agree, and that pragmatic approach is what we need to do. It isn't necessary to reach perfection. We just need to make progress towards this. Now, you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act earlier. Is your take on the follow-on private investment that we have met or exceeded the projections you expected?
I think so. It's basically catalyzed a revolution in deployment of renewables, electrification, and domestic manufacturing of renewable and storage equipment. And yes, there's immense private capital matching the public investment and preempting the public investment. When you know you have the full support of the US government behind you, dollars are going to mobilize. And we're seeing that happening everywhere from the very early stage up through mature multi-billion-dollar infrastructure investments. And it's something that couldn't have been more strongly in the national interest, because now the US will be exporting some of the much needed clean technologies of the future. And in doing that, yes, you're bringing together tons of private capital to make that happen.
Now, there is a plank in a number of different presidential candidates' platforms calling for the rollback of the IRA. How would that, in your opinion, affect America's competitiveness, not only in solar, but across the renewable space?
I think what's interesting to note is how many politicians voted against IRA and then got very, very excited to announce IRA-related investments in their states.
Well, they're politicians.
Follow the money to where some of these factories are being built, where some jobs are being created, where some projects are being deployed, a lot of them are happening in the jurisdictions of politicians that outwardly were not expressing excitement about IRA. So whatever the next presidential candidate wants to do or is posturing to do, what will have to be reckoned with is the fact that many of the benefits of this policy is going to areas where the legislator didn't necessarily vote for IRA, but was very excited to have it once it came out. So whether it could be repealed by the Senate or Congress will be a function of that. I think maybe one analogy would be 7 years ago when they were looking at repealing Obamacare and they weren't able to. They were sort of more able to chip around at the edges of it and change some things, but the benefits were enough that a full repeal wasn't quite doable.
The political reality is that the politicians like to create their own reality. And so do you feel like we have already established a new approach to financing renewable energy in this country, and it is irreversible? And therefore, a lot of this conversation is simply noise that we can ignore?
I don't know about noise that we can ignore, but renewables are cost competitive. I mentioned it earlier, but we're really subsidizing fossil fuels to the you-know-whats. There's no story anymore about renewables being too expensive to deploy. In a lot of cases, utility ratepayers would be better off if their utility shut down coal generation assets and replaced it with renewables. It's often cheaper to build new renewables than it is to continue running existing fossil fuel plants. The idea of a green premium is not really reality anymore. So now you're seeing the people that were champions of the free market maybe get a little freaked out now that fossil fuels aren't favored by the free market. And reality is reality. The economics of renewables are great. The economics of batteries are great. Electric cars are great. And that transition is underway no matter what. You would have to really do a lot to pump the brakes on it.
However, the fossil fuel subsidies are locked in. Do you think there's a possibility that we could cut them off over the next 5 years or so?
I hope, because we're wasting a lot of money on subsidizing companies that are destroying the planet. It's a highly inefficient use of capital. I don't have any crystal ball on what Washington will do, but it would be good for the economy and good for the planet if we reduced or eliminated fossil fuel subsidies.
Now, it's pretty clear you think we have most of the pieces in place, but you mentioned that there is necessary innovation out there. Where would you like to see additional innovation, new components of the transition put in place? What would you invest in if you saw an opportunity right now?
Well, as I said before, there's a lot of really great technologies that have been invented that are in need of more deployment and more rapid deployment.
Mm-hmm.
So again, technologies that can match supply with demand of renewables. We know that solar and wind are intermittent. You only get your solar when the sun shines and wind when the wind blows. Now, we've solved that a little bit with storage, but most storage that we've introduced is giving you 4 hours of storage.
Mm-hmm.
You can further solve that with analytics. That's data and physics. So smart heating and cooling is one of those. If you can match the supply of renewables with demand to take them and store them for later in a hot water tank like our portfolio company Harvest Thermal does, and then use it later when the home needs it. You also match supply with demand with things like virtual PPAs, like the one that Bright Knight did with Rivian. So those are things that exist today that need further scaling. Then another is what you mentioned earlier, what we do with batteries after their useful life. That could be second life batteries or battery recycling. And we're very excited to be an investor in Ncycle because we think the new battery economy is going to need a lot of great adjacent solutions around it. Another thing that we've learned in the last few months is that there are challenges that municipals and large corporations face when it comes to actually scaling up a fleet of electric trucks or electric buses. You actually have to do pretty sophisticated multivariable optimization modeling to figure out how to run your routes and charge these things without them running out of juice and without overpaying for charging infrastructure. It's a non-trivial problem. We talk about it like it's nothing. Oh, just buy an electric bus. What's the big deal? There's actually a lot of sophisticated analytics that have to go into how you're running those buses and running those trucks. Well, artificial intelligence is helping to solve that. And we're going to be very excited soon for the announcement of a deal that we did with a company that's a one-stop shop to take care of all of that. So again, that's one where electric transportation had been invented, but the services around it hadn't necessarily been invented or deployed. So here's a really smart couple of founders that created a software that could solve it in one stop. The deployment of that will accelerate the transition to electric vehicles. That's the kind of stuff that we're really excited about.
In a lot of ways, what we've been through over the past 20, 30 years with the digital transition has set the stage for the solutions that we need in order to address the sustainability challenge. And so this is a really important conversation. I want to take a quick commercial break. We're going to be right back. Now let's get back to the discussion with renewable energy and clean tech investor Ben Wolkon of MUUS Climate Partners. Ben, you're describing a really interesting new infrastructure and economy. Where do you imagine new flows of value are going to emerge as we rethink how we manage the flow of energy through the economy? For instance, you described Harvest Thermal's ability to store energy as hot water, which of course could be used in the home or in a business until it's needed as energy again and convert it back. Does that mean that a home could be paid for storing energy? And
yeah, it's a great point. Great point. And you're correct that as we move from dirty energy to clean energy, we're also moving from centralized energy to distributed energy. Mm-hmm. And when you have distributed energy that's also renewable, it is by definition a more complex set of energy generation, which means that you've got the opportunity of a lifetime for software and analytics to simplify that complexity and create a ton of value in doing so, because you're accelerating decarbonization, you're making energy lower cost for people. You're really bringing a lot of value to the system. Harvest Thermal is one of our portfolio companies that's doing that, and they have a brilliant solution. They recognize that there is a revolution in home heating that's quietly happening, where conventional home heating systems are being replaced by heat pumps. You might have to fact check me on this, but I believe the sales of heat pumps exceeded the sales of conventional home heating systems for the first time last year.
Yes, it did.
It's fantastic because heat pumps are not only electric, but they're also highly efficient. So we've reduced the amount of energy that is needed to heat a home while also electrifying it. That's really, really great news for the climate, and that transition can't happen fast enough. By the way, there's a lot of BS out there about how heat pumps don't work in cold climates. That's now being debunked. Really, there should be a very rapid transition to heat pumps. It's a no-brainer solution. Harvest Thermal recognized that, and they recognized it a couple of years before the wave started. And rather than trying to build a new heat pump hardware solution, they took existing best-in-class hardware solutions for heat pumps, and they added in their own proprietary control system. And that control system can draw renewable power from the grid when it's online. So when your solar comes online, it can draw that power and it stores it in a hot water tank. And then that hot water tank is storing your energy for later when your home needs it for your space heating and for your hot water. And they started doing it in California. They then expanded to the rest of the Pacific Northwest. And yes, to answer your question, the value that they're providing to the grid is immense. Whether there's economic value capture that can happen in the future, that'll be up to the company to talk about. But we can say quantifiably, without a doubt, the value that they're providing to the grid in doing that is immense. They're enabling load shifting, they're enabling more renewables to come online, and they're enabling ratepayers' energy bills to not spike. So they're a fantastic company.
Do you see, though, that the infrastructure is ready for this bidirectional distribution approach as compared to the one-way delivery system that we built in really literally in the early 1900s?
Yeah, again, that will be a hard problem to solve for a number of reasons. First of all, the power grid needs the software capabilities to manage that. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, you have concerns about how it might adversely affect the charge and discharge of batteries, or would it degrade batteries. We have another great portfolio company called Utilidata, which is providing the artificial intelligence capabilities to the grid to enable things like that. And they've become NVIDIA's main partner to decarbonize power, and we're really happy about the progress Utilidata's made.
Now, China and the European Union have invested more than the United States in renewable energy. Is our economy positioned to compete with them as sustainability and renewable energy becomes a mission-critical feature of the entire global infrastructure? How do you feel about how we're doing overall?
It's a great question. I happen to be a very strong believer in American entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. I think over the last decades, some of the greatest innovation has come out of the U.S. We're a hotbed for it because of our universities. And on the energy front, we have a whole ecosystem of national labs that are dedicated to research and development and commercialization of new energy technologies. So I'd be very happy to bet on the US when it comes to inventing the great new technologies of the future that will play a role in climate change. And now, hopefully, with the passage of IRA, the infrastructure investment and manufacturing investment will be best in class too.
Are there sectors where you think we have a really decided advantage?
I think when it comes to innovation generally, we have a decided advantage. I think a lot of that has to do with the venture capital ecosystem that we have. It has to do with the universities that are enabling research. And again, it has to do with the national labs. But it's also something culturally that we have in the US and within our legal system, that we've set up something where it's okay for entrepreneurs to start and fail and try again, get up many times. And we've had some really great outcomes across all sectors by doing that. And I think that's a really special advantage that we shouldn't take for granted.
Our approach, which is more distributed than the centralized approach, particularly in China, is often criticized. But it seems to me that when we recognize the opportunity and the mistakes we've made, that we can move very quickly. Where would you say we need to put additional investment right now in order to make the greatest competitive difference in terms of our relationship with the rest of the global market?
I'll give an answer that is outside of the venture ecosystem largely, although there are a couple of plays in the venture ecosystem, which is transmission.
Yeah.
We can really solve a lot of our pain points around decarbonizing power, which again is probably more than 50% of the climate problem, by building out a ton of transmission rather, so that renewable power can be produced in one place and transported to another place. Sometimes you need large swaths of land, which the US is blessed to have, that's more sparsely populated, so you can build huge solar plants and wind farms and then transport it to more densely populated areas. It's pretty hard to build a 500 megawatt solar system in New York City. You probably couldn't. So we're going to need to produce a ton of solar and wind power in regions where you have the land to build it and then transport it elsewhere. That's one thing that we're going to need to have a huge investment in. And it won't just be because of population density. It's also because of weather conditions, time zones, and things like that. We can really make a huge dent in solving the intermittency problem of solar and wind if we have a larger build out of transmission.
Well, of course, our infrastructure is largely defined by the fact that utilities were granted a de facto monopoly in order to provide a certain level of service within a geography. Is there potentially a venture-oriented approach to financing our infrastructure that would obsolete the utility as a business model?
If somebody comes up with that, I hope they give us a call.
That's a clear and simple answer. So that would be important. What companies that may not lie within traditional sustainable practices do you think are going to benefit as a result of the transition we're going through? Are there sectors that you see coming, realizing new opportunities because of the transition?
I think in a lot of places you would see a world where producers of clean energy, in other words, if you're a real estate owner and
Right.
you can use your existing assets to build clean energy and then sell it or reduce your overhead, I think that's a really compelling investment in a lot of cases. I think you're going to see some really interesting business models built around electric trucking and logistics and the renting and leasing of electric vehicles, because that whole model will probably need some changes in light of the life of a battery. So I think you're going to see a lot of really great adjacent industries where smart entrepreneurs are going to figure out a way to benefit from this new technological ecosystem that we have around clean energy.
So let me ask the other end of that question, which is, as an investor, what's your take on the long-term value of oil companies, the way that they are currently behaving? Are they setting themselves up for a fall, or do you see somehow they survive and thrive in using fossil fuels primarily for plastic, which seems to be their go-forward strategy?
I don't have a crystal ball around that, and I don't waste a lot of time thinking about their value. I'm aware that they're destroying the planet, and I'm focused on finding solutions that can change that, because right now, as we're oriented, people need fossil fuels in order to have their quality of life. And those fossil fuels can theoretically be replaced at favorable economics, and we just need to do that a lot faster. So I hope we can find substitutes for petroleum fuels as well as plastic. And whether the oil companies want to be part of that or not is their choice. You and I have very little ability to affect that, but great innovation can help disrupt it.
Well, the upcoming United Nations COP28 meetings being led by Sultan Al Jaber, who is he runs a renewable energy company, but he also is the CEO of the United Arab Emirates national oil company, Masdar. Is he, as a person, thinking about this from the business personality perspective, is he representative of the choice that oil companies face today? Can he help break the logjam, or do you see them continuing to erect barriers, which you gestured at earlier in the conversation?
I don't know if I have a great answer to that question. I know that oil and gas companies are primarily interested in producing oil and gas and doing so for as long as they can. Every time we've seen in the last couple of years, I shouldn't say every time, but most of the time in the last few years, we've seen an oil major make a commitment towards going net zero. They reverse course pretty quickly,
Yeah.
as soon as their stock price takes the slightest hit, or as soon as there's the slightest hiccup, or as soon as they think nobody's looking. This is to say the oil and gas industry has not necessarily been a helpful partner in the transition so far. They certainly have the capability to be, though, right? There are a lot of places that we can look at. If, for example, geothermal energy is one where if you have expertise in fracking and you have assets that can help with drilling, you have an innate competitive advantage in geothermal. By the way, I have nothing against people who have worked in oil and gas. In fact, I think some of the smartest people in climate tech are people who have prior experience in oil and gas. So there's a lot of knowledge transfer that can happen. There's a lot of capital that industry has that they can put to good work. There's a lot of equipment they have that they can put to good work. That they totally have the ability to be a useful and helpful partner in the energy transition. But I don't think that anybody can reasonably say that so far on the net, the oil and gas industry has been more helpful to the energy transition than they have been harmful.
Well, let's hope they eventually wake up to that. But, as a venture investor, you have early access to a lot of this. What can one of our listeners, a retail investor, put their money into today? What advice would you give them in order to support the transition, making it go faster? Should they be in an ETF for lithium recovery? Where would you put your money if you were one of them?
Yeah, I'm really not as much of an expert in public markets. I do know that there are some really great ETFs that track renewables and track batteries, and that's definitely one pathway. There are also companies that pop up from time to time that allow the crowdfunding of projects. You can certainly look for those. Sometimes I think what an individual can do is really get involved in their community and vote, sometimes even at the local level. That's the most effective thing that they can do. I know that's not an investment.
Sure.
But
it is led.
Right. It is an effort that you can make. And then, of course, there are investments that you can make in your own life. If you're a homeowner, transition to a heat pump and electric heating. You can add solar panels. You can switch to an electric vehicle. These are meaningful changes that you can make, where in a lot of cases, I don't want to say in every case, but in a lot of cases, there's quite a positive economic ROI from doing so.
Now, the investments you make are signals that folks can follow and get a sense of where things are going. How can our listeners keep up with what you're doing?
We are really happy and excited to have backed dozens of companies that are playing a meaningful role in addressing climate change. Typically, when they have some sort of announcement about a piece of progress that they've made, we put it out there on our LinkedIn and social media channels. So you can certainly follow MUUS Climate Partners on LinkedIn and Twitter and see what our companies are up to.
Well, Ben, thanks very much for spending time with us today. It's been fascinating.
Thank you so much, Mitch. It's been great spending time together, and I appreciate your thoughtful questions.
We've been speaking with Ben Wolkon, a partner at MUUS Climate Ventures, an investor in more than a dozen renewable energy and clean tech companies. And you can learn more about Ben and the MUUS portfolio at MUUSclimate.com. MUUSclimate.com is all one word, no space, no dash, MUUSclimate.com. Evolution happens in every system, and crises are an essential catalyst for rapid transitions between evolutionary eras. And of course, we're living through one of the greatest evolutionary transformations in human history. The physics of global warming is indisputable, but the problem with putting physics to work is people. We do love to argue, even after it's productive. Markets are another form of debate about the direction society will go. But in this debate, real money moves quickly towards opportunities instead of getting hung up in Congress and debated endlessly on TV news shows. MUUS Capital Ventures investments are just a few of many bets that illustrate how much of the solution for decarbonization is currently available. And it's just a matter of putting them to work. Every day, the implications of climate change become more evident, making the urgent steps necessary to reduce emissions by at least 50% before 2030 visible to even the most recalcitrant climate deniers in Congress and those running for the presidency. So let's hope and vote to ensure that the United States remains the leading innovator in clean tech, because it can unlock an economy in which more money stays local New good-paying jobs are created for every category of worker. And homeowners, even homeowners, are compensated for their role in building and operating a resilient infrastructure that constantly adjusts in response to energy generation capacity, weather patterns, and demand for electricity. It can be a highly dynamic and distributed solution, one that we all know in various forms from the rise of digitization. The internet, all of the smartphones and the apps that we use are representative of the same kinds of phenomena, but they'll be translated into the physical infrastructure that we use every day. So keep an eye on what MUUS is doing, and we, of course, will keep you apprised of any progress there as well. I hope you'll take a moment to share this podcast or any of the more than 420 interviews that we've done on sustainability in your ear. Folks, by writing a review on your favorite podcast platform, you're going to help our neighbors find our show. So you're the amplifier that spreads more ideas so we create less waste. Please tell your friends, family, and coworkers they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or any of the purveyors of podcast goodness that they prefer. Thanks, folks, for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Earth911, and we will be back soon with another innovator interview. In the meantime, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.